I didn't find out my parents had sold my grandfather's military keepsake in a quiet, reasonable way. I found out standing in my childhood home staring at an empty display case while my younger sister's brand new Tesla gleamed in the driveway like a trophy no one had earned. And when my grandmother finally heard what they'd done, how they'd sold the one thing my grandfather left specifically for me, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She smiled and said very softly, "That keepsake." The color drained from my parents' faces before she even finished the sentence. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked through the front door. You can feel it when a house has been rearranged without asking you. The air sits differently. Sounds echo where they shouldn't. Even the smell changes, less like old wood and furniture polish, more like something scrubbed too clean, as if someone wanted to erase evidence. I had just come home on leave. Not the celebratory kind with banners and hugs and a roast in the oven, but the practical kind. A few days between duty rotations. Enough time to sleep in a real bed and remind myself what silence sounded like without boots marching through it. My duffel bag was still slung over my shoulder when I noticed it. The display case. It stood against the far wall of my parents' living room, right where it had always been. Same spot it had occupied for as long as I could remember, ever since my grandfather retired from the military and moved in with us during the last years of his life. Except now it was empty. The glass was clean. Too clean. No fingerprints, no dust outlines, no faint impressions where objects had rested for decades. Just space. My chest tightened sharp and immediate the way it does before impact. The way it had done once overseas, seconds before a blast that changed the sound of my own breathing forever. I stepped closer. Gone were the medals carefully mounted, each one labeled in my grandfather's precise handwriting. Gone was the ceremonial dagger he'd been awarded when he reached general rank, its hilt wrapped in dark leather worn smooth by time not use. Gone was the folded flag that had never been refolded since the day he placed it there himself. And gone, most important of all, was the handwritten letter he'd left tucked behind the frame, the one addressed to me. I set my bag down slowly, like sudden movement might shatter something fragile inside me. "Mom," I called. No answer. I heard laughter outside instead, bright, carefree, my sister's laugh. I turned toward the front window and saw it. A glossy black Tesla sat in the driveway, sunlight sliding across its surface like it was alive. The temporary tags were still on it. The interior looked untouched, pristine, expensive. My sister stood beside it, phone raised, angling for the perfect shot. She shifted her weight, flipped her hair, smiled like she hadn't just parked her happiness on top of someone else's history. For a moment my brain refused to connect the dots. Then it did. And I felt that familiar, disciplined stillness settle over me, the one the military had trained into my bones. The one that kept me functioning when panic would have been easier. I stepped outside. She noticed me then. Her smile flickered just a little. "Oh," she said, "you're home." I nodded. "Where's Grandpa's display?" She blinked. "What?" "The case," I said, "inside." She shrugged, already bored. "Ask Mom." That answer alone told me everything. Inside, I found my parents in the kitchen. My mother was stirring coffee like nothing in the world had shifted. My father sat at the table, scrolling on his tablet, calm, in the way only people who believe they're untouchable can be. I didn't sit. "Where is it?" I asked. My mother sighed before I even finished the sentence. "Can you at least say hello?" I looked at my father. "Where's Grandpa's keepsake?" He didn't look up. We took care of it. That phrase, "took care of it," hit me harder than any shouted confession could have. Took care of it, how? My mother set her spoon down. "You're making this sound dramatic." "You sold it," I said, not a question. Silence. My father finally looked up. Yes. The word landed flat and final. "You sold it," I repeated. "The medals, the dagger, the letter, everything." "It was valuable," my mother said quickly. "And it was just sitting there." "It was his," I said, "and he left it to me." My sister wandered in keys, jingling in her hand. "It's not like you were using it," she said lightly. "You're never here." I turned to her. "That's because I'm serving." She rolled her eyes. "You get paid for that." My hands curled into fists before I could stop them. My father cleared his throat. "We're family. What he left belongs to all of us." No, I said, my voice low now. He was very clear. My mother's expression hardened. He didn't need it anymore. Something inside me cracked at that. And you didn't think to tell me, I asked. My father leaned back. We didn't want to burden you. No, I said. You didn't want me to stop you. My mother pointed toward the window. Your sister needed a reliable car, something safe, something modern. I laughed once short and bitter. So you bought her a Tesla. My sister smiled. Isn't it beautiful? I looked back at the empty wall in the living room, at the space where my grandfather's legacy had lived. And I realized something then, something cold and sobering. They hadn't just sold an object. They'd sold proof that someone in this family had believed in me. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I picked up my bag. Don't tell your grandmother, my mother said sharply as I headed for the door. She doesn't need the stress. I paused my hand on the knob. She deserves the truth, I said. And for the first time since I'd walked in, they looked afraid. I drove to my grandmother's place the next morning before the heat could settle into the pavement and make everything feel heavier than it already was. Early light has a way of stripping things down, no shadows to hide and no soft edges to blur the truth. I preferred it that way. Her building sat at the end of a quiet street lined with oaks that had outlived most of the arguments in my family. The kind of place my mother liked to describe as safe and managed, which really meant controlled. Clean hallways, polite smiles, the faint smell of lemon cleaner and something floral trying too hard. I signed in at the front desk and rode the elevator up alone. The hum of it reminded me of long nights on base, waiting for doors to open, waiting for instructions that always came too late or too fast. When the doors slid apart, I already knew she'd be awake. My grandmother had never been one to sleep through important moments. She was sitting by the window when I knocked sunlight catching the silver in her hair. A book rested open on her lap, a finger marking the page like she'd been interrupted mid-thought and didn't appreciate it. She looked up at me once and said, "You look like your grandfather did when he knew someone had crossed a line." I closed the door behind me and sat across from her. The chair felt sturdier than it needed to be built for people who didn't plan on being pushed around. They sold it, I said. She didn't ask what it was. She waited. The keepsake, I continued. All of it. The medals, the dagger, the letter. They sold it for almost $90,000. Still, she didn't react the way people expect when you drop a number like that into the room. No gasp, no shaking hands. Just a slow, steady inhale through her nose. And what did they buy, she asked. A Tesla, I said, for my sister. That's when she smiled. Not a happy smile, not even a bitter one. Just a small knowing curve of her mouth like she'd finally reached the part of a story where the ending made sense. Well, she said quietly, that explains the hurry. I felt something loosen in my chest even as confusion tightened somewhere else. You're not angry. She looked at me over her glasses. Anger is loud, she said. It tells people what you plan to do. I prefer silence. I told her everything then. Not just the sale, but the way my parents talked about it. Family asset. He didn't need it anymore. You're never here. I repeated my sister's laugh the way she'd jingled the keys like a victory bell. My grandmother listened the way she always had completely. No interruptions, no nodding at the wrong moments. When I finished, she closed her book with care and set it on the side table. They told you not to tell me, she said. Yes. Her smile sharpened just a fraction. Of course they did. I swallowed. Grandma, I don't want this to hurt you. She reached for my hand. Her grip was warm, steady. Child, she said your grandfather spent a lifetime teaching officers that avoiding discomfort only delays consequences. Pain comes either way. I exhaled slowly. What do we do? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to a small cabinet near the wall. From it, she pulled out a thin folder, edges worn but neat. She set it on the table between us without opening it. When your grandfather got sick, she said he became very particular about paperwork. That didn't surprise me. He'd been particular about everything. He didn't trust assumptions, she continued, or good intentions. He trusted documentation. She opened the folder. Inside were photographs I recognized instantly, the keepsake laid out piece by piece, serial numbers, visible appraisals, stamped and signed insurance forms, with dates that stretched back years. At the bottom lay a copy of his will, a section highlighted in clean, deliberate strokes. My name sat there in black ink, unmistakable. This, she said, tapping the page, is called a specific bequest. My throat tightened. They said it belonged to the family. She met my eyes. They say many things. I stared at the page, so they had no right. No, she said calmly, they did not. A strange mix of relief and grief washed through me. Relief that I hadn't imagined his intention. Grief that the people who raised me had ignored it so easily. They moved fast, she went on. That tells me they knew enough to worry. I thought of the spotless glass case, the missing dust, the Tesla tags still dangling. What happens now? I asked. She closed the folder and slid it back into the cabinet. Now, she said, we let them believe they've won. My pulse skipped. That's it. For the moment. She picked up her phone, already scrolling. I'll need the buyer's information. I don't have it. She smiled again. We will. I watched her type, fingers steady despite their age. You're very calm about this. She glanced up. Your grandfather always said the most dangerous officer in the room is the one who doesn't raise his voice. She made a call, then spoke quietly, efficiently. No names I recognized, no explanations she didn't need to give. When she hung up, she looked at me and said, I'll handle this. I felt a flicker of guilt. I don't want you dragged into family drama. She laughed softly. Family drama dragged me into this when they sold something that wasn't theirs. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. Outside, a nurse passed by with a cart. Somewhere down the hall, a television murmured. What do? I asked finally. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You go back to your life. You do your job. You don't argue. You don't explain. And you don't warn them. I nodded. As I stood to leave, she added almost gently, and when they invite you over to celebrate that car, you come. I paused at the door. Why? Her eyes held mine sharp and unwavering. Because she said some lessons require witnesses. I left her apartment feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet, not because I was losing something, but because I was about to see who in my family would survive the truth. Nothing happened right away. That was the hardest part. In the military, you're trained to expect cause and effect. You act, something responds. You move, the world adjusts. Even waiting has structure, timelines, checkpoints, updates that tell you whether you're still on course. This was different. Weeks passed and my family behaved like they'd gotten away with something permanent. I returned to base 2 days after seeing my grandmother. I slipped back into routine the way I always did, muscle memory carrying me through mornings that started before sunrise and ended long after the day had burned itself out. Boots, formations, paperwork, training runs that left my lungs raw and my thoughts too tired to wander until they weren't. At night, when the noise finally dropped away, I thought about the empty display case. About my grandfather's hands, large, steady, placing each medal just so not to show off but to remember. He'd never talked much about his career unless I asked specific questions. He believed stories earned their telling. And when he'd chosen me quietly, deliberately to receive those keepsakes, it hadn't felt like favoritism. It had felt like trust. Meanwhile, back home, my sister posted like she'd just unlocked a new level of life. The Tesla appeared on my phone screen more times than I could count. Daylight photos, nighttime photos, close-ups of the interior. Her hand on the wheel nails, perfectly done, captioned with things like hard work pays off and finally. My parents commented with heart emojis and congratulations. Not once did any of them mention my grandfather. I didn't comment, I didn't react, I didn't call. I followed my grandmother's instructions exactly. Silence, I was learning, was not the absence of action, it was a form of discipline. About 4 weeks in, my mother called. I let it ring. She texted instead. We're having people over this weekend, a little get-together, you should come. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an invitation wrapped in normalcy. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I'll be there. I didn't add anything else. The call from my grandmother came the next morning. They've planned a party, she said, as if discussing the weather. Yes. They think it's about the car. I know. There was a pause, then I've invited a few people as well. I smiled for the first time in days. Friends of yours? Of sorts, she said. Bring your uniform. The drive home that weekend felt heavier than the first one had. Not because I was anxious, because I wasn't. Anxiety requires uncertainty. This felt like standing at the edge of a controlled demolition watching professionals set charges with careful hands. My parents' house looked different when I pulled up. Not physically, emotionally. Cars lined the street. Laughter drifted from the backyard. Music played too loud, the kind of cheerful noise meant to announce success to anyone within earshot. And there it was. The Tesla sat in the driveway, washed to a shine so bright it almost hurt to look at. A ribbon had been tied around one of the side mirrors, red and ridiculous. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand. I thought about my grandfather's funeral, the way the folded flag had been placed into my grandmother's arms, the way she'd thanked the officer, voice steady even as her hands shook. Then I squared my shoulders and walked in. The backyard had been transformed into something out of a catalog. String lights, a grill going full blast, neighbors I barely recognized holding drinks like they'd been invited to a victory lap. My sister spotted me first. She glanced at my uniform and smirked. "You really wore that?" "Yes," I said. She laughed. "Relax, it's just a party." My parents joined us moments later. My mother hugged me stiffly, careful not to wrinkle anything. My father clapped me on the shoulder like he always did, proud of the image, if not the substance. "We're glad you could make it," my mother said. "We didn't know if you'd be free." I looked past her at the car. "Seems important." My sister beamed. "Isn't it?" People gathered. Compliments flowed. Someone asked about my job, then lost interest halfway through the answer. Another asked my sister about the car's features. She rattled them off with rehearsed enthusiasm. I stayed quiet. Then the gate opened. I heard it before I saw it, the subtle shift in conversation, the way laughter stuttered and thinned. I turned. My grandmother walked in wearing a pale blouse and dark slacks, posture straight, expression calm. Beside her was a man in a tailored suit carrying a slim leather folder. Behind them came another woman I recognized vaguely from old photographs, a family friend from my grandfather's career days. My mother's face drained of color. "Mom," she said quickly, stepping forward, "you should have told us you were coming." My grandmother smiled pleasantly. I was invited. She looked at me then, and something unspoken passed between us. A quiet acknowledgement. My father cleared his throat. "What's this about?" My grandmother gestured around the yard. A celebration, apparently. The man beside her stepped forward slightly but didn't speak. People shifted uncomfortably, drinks lowered, conversations stalled mid-sentence. My sister frowned. "Grandma, this isn't the time." "Oh," my grandmother said gently, "it's exactly the time." She turned to the man with the folder and nodded. And just like that, the party stopped being a party. No one announced that the party was over. It just stopped breathing. The music kept playing for a few seconds, too long, cheerful and misplaced, until someone finally reached for the speaker and turned it down. Conversations dissolved into fragments. A laugh escaped somewhere near the grill and died immediately like it had embarrassed itself. My grandmother didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. She simply stood there, hands folded loosely in front of her, and waited. People gave it to her. My mother recovered first, or tried to. She smiled too widely and stepped closer, placing herself between my grandmother and the small crowd, as if she could physically block whatever was coming. "Mom," she said, her tone tight, "let's go inside. It's noisy out here." My grandmother tilted her head. "I won't be long." My father glanced around, suddenly aware of the audience. "This isn't appropriate." "That's an interesting word," my grandmother replied, "considering the circumstances." My sister crossed her arms. "Grandma, you're making this awkward." My grandmother looked at her for the first time, really looked at her. Not unkindly, not warmly either, just clearly. "Awkward," she repeated. "Is that what you think this is?" The man beside her, her lawyer, opened the folder. The sound of paper sliding free was quiet, but it carried. It always does when people know what documents mean. "I won't read everything aloud," my grandmother said, turning slightly so her voice carried without shouting. "But I will say this much." She paused just long enough for my parents to feel it. "The military keepsake your father left behind was not a family heirloom in the way you've chosen to believe." My mother's lips parted. "Mom." "It was a specific bequest," my grandmother continued. Documented, appraised, insured, and placed into a trust with one clear beneficiary. She turned her head and looked directly at me. My granddaughter. I felt the attention shift instantly. Not sympathy, recognition. My father shook his head. That's not how we understood it. My grandmother smiled faintly. Understanding is not the same as ownership. The lawyer stepped forward, then his voice even and practiced. The items were sold without legal authority. The buyer has been notified that the sale is under dispute. My sister laughed nervously. This is insane. Is it? My grandmother asked. My mother's hands trembled. We didn't know about any trust. That, my grandmother said calmly, was intentional. The word settled like dust. You planned this? My father asked, disbelief creeping in. I prepared. My grandmother corrected. Your father taught me to. She gestured toward the driveway, toward the Tesla. The funds from that sale were used to purchase a vehicle, she said, which means that vehicle is now part of the dispute. My sister's face went white. You can't take my car. My grandmother's gaze sharpened. It was never yours. The lawyer extended a single document toward my parents. Notice of intent, he said. You'll be receiving formal paperwork within the week. My father didn't take it. My mother did and then dropped it like it burned. This is cruel, she whispered. No, my grandmother said softly. This is consequence. I felt something steady settle into my spine then. Not triumph, not revenge. Alignment. I stepped forward, finally speaking loud enough for the group to hear. My grandfather didn't leave me that keepsake because I'm special, I said. He left it to me because he trusted me to protect what it stood for. My sister scoffed. You're never even here. I'm serving, I replied, and I didn't think that meant I had to guard my inheritance from my own family. Silence. Somewhere behind us, a neighbor cleared his throat. Another glanced at their watch. People were already planning exits. My grandmother turned back to my parents. You sold something you did not own, she said. You benefited from it, and now you will undo that benefit. My father's voice cracked. You're choosing her over us. My grandmother didn't hesitate. I'm choosing what's right. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't about me versus them. It was about the moment my family lost the ability to pretend. My sister grabbed her keys from the table. This is unbelievable. She stormed toward the driveway, stopping short when she reached the Tesla like she expected it to reassure her. It didn't. My mother looked around at the guests. I think we should wrap this up. People nodded too quickly. Drinks were abandoned, goodbyes mumbled. The party dissolved into embarrassed movement. As the yard emptied, my grandmother turned to me. It's in motion now, she said quietly. I nodded. Thank you. She squeezed my hand once. You didn't ask me to do this. No, I said. You chose to. She smiled. Exactly. Behind us, my parents stood frozen in the wreckage of their own choices. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They crept in one by one the way reality does when it's done waiting for denial to catch up. 2 days after the party, my mother called me for the first time since I'd left the house. Not a text, not a carefully worded message she could revise before sending. A call. That alone told me she was scared. I let it ring 3 times before answering. We need to talk, she said, skipping hello. I'm at work, I replied. Is someone hurt? A pause. No. Then it can wait. Her breath caught. They're saying we have to pay it back. I leaned against the cool metal railing outside the building, the morning air sharp in my lungs. Who is they? The buyer, she said. And some attorney he hired. He's furious. He says the sale wasn't clean. I closed my eyes. Of course it wasn't. They're threatening legal action, she continued. They want the full amount returned, immediately. And I asked, and we don't have that kind of money just sitting around, she said, voice rising. We already spent it. I thought of the Tesla, of the ribbon, of my sister's smile. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it in the way you mean it when something inevitable finally arrives. That sounds difficult. There was a sharp intake of breath. How can you say that? Because this isn't happening to you, I replied evenly. It's happening because of you. She went quiet. They're talking about the car, she said after a moment. Something about asset tracing. Yes, I said, that's how it works. She lowered her voice. Can you talk to your grandmother? I laughed softly. You should. She won't answer my calls, my mother whispered. I ended the conversation there. The next call came from my sister. She didn't bother pretending to be calm. This is your fault, she snapped the second I answered. You sicked her on us. I told the truth, I said, that's all. They're saying the car might be taken, she said. Panic, bleeding through the anger. Do you know how humiliating that is? I pictured her parking it carefully, avoiding scratches, the way she'd circled it during the party like a prize animal. Yes, I said, I do. You're enjoying this, she accused. No, I said quietly, I'm watching you learn. She hung up on me. 3 days later, the keepsake came home. It arrived in a reinforced case delivered by a courier who treated it like something fragile and irreplaceable, which it was. My grandmother insisted we open it together. She laid everything out on her dining table with the same care my grandfather once had. The metals caught the light first, then the dagger, its edge still pristine, and finally, the letter. My hands shook when I unfolded it. If you're reading this, it began, it means you didn't flinch when it mattered. I swallowed hard. He'd written about service, about integrity, about how family isn't defined by blood alone but by who respects what you've earned. My grandmother watched me quietly. When I finished, she reached out and covered my hand with hers. He knew, she said, even before the rest of them showed us. The legal fallout escalated quickly after that. The buyer wanted his money back. The funds had to come from somewhere. My parents scrambled accounts, emptied favors, called in pride shredded. When it still wasn't enough, the car became leverage. The Tesla disappeared from the driveway one gray morning. No ribbon, no photos. Just an empty space where my sister's certainty used to be. My father came by my grandmother's place unannounced that afternoon. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older, like a man whose authority had finally been questioned and found lacking. You didn't have to let it go this far, he said. My grandmother met his gaze. You didn't have to steal from your own child. His mouth tightened. She's not a child. No, she said. She's a soldier, and you treated her legacy like spare change. He looked at me then. You could have stopped this. I shook my head. I didn't start it. He left without another word. The house I'd grown up in didn't belong to my parents anymore, not in the way they'd assumed. Titles and trusts have a way of clarifying that. Plans were revised, permissions revoked, futures adjusted. My sister moved out within a month. My parents followed soon after. When the dust finally settled, the silence felt different. Earned. I mounted my grandfather's keepsake in my own space, not to display it, but to live with it. A reminder that what we inherit isn't always meant to be shared, sometimes it's meant to be protected. And that sometimes the strongest response isn't confrontation. It's letting the truth finish what it started. Once the noise faded, what remained was paperwork. That's the part people never talk about when they imagine justice. They picture shouting dramatic exits, maybe a slammed door or two. They don't picture emails with subject lines like formal demand or envelopes marked certified mail. They don't picture dates, signatures, deadlines. But that's where everything becomes real. My grandmother handled it all with the same calm precision she'd brought to the party. She didn't gloat. She didn't lecture. She reviewed documents at her kitchen table every morning, glasses low on her nosepen, moving steadily like this was just another task on a long, sensible list. I watched her one afternoon as she organized a stack of papers into neat piles. One for the buyer, one for the bank, one for my parents. She slid the last pile into a folder and closed it with finality. They're going to be very tired soon, she said. I understood what she meant a week later. My mother showed up at my door without warning. Not my grandmother's door, mine. I opened it and barely recognized her. Her hair was pulled back hastily. Her eyes were rimmed red, not from crying. My mother rarely cried, but from exhaustion, the kind that seeps in when your usual tools stop working. I just need a minute, she said, already stepping inside. I didn't stop her. She sat on the edge of my couch like she wasn't sure she deserved the space, her hands twisted together in her lap. We're losing the house, she said. The words hung there bare and unadorned. I waited. They say the repayment has to be made in full, she continued. The accounts we used, they were flagged. Everything's frozen until it's resolved. I nodded slowly. That's what happens when money changes hands illegally. She flinched. We didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied. Her voice broke then just slightly. "Your sister is blaming us." I almost smiled, almost. "And Dad?" I asked. She looked down. "He's angry at everyone. Mostly himself, I think." There it was, the part of the story I'd been waiting for. Regret. Not for what they'd done to me, not for ignoring my grandfather's wishes, but for miscalculating the cost. "You could tell your grandmother to stop," my mother said quietly. "She'd listen to you." I met her gaze. "No, she wouldn't, and even if she did, I wouldn't ask." Her shoulders sagged. "I raised you better than this," she said weakly. I stood. "You raised me to respect what doesn't belong to me." She left without saying goodbye. The next casualty was my sister's certainty. She called me late one night, her voice unsteady in a way I'd never heard before. "They're taking everything she said. Do you know what that feels like?" "Yes," I answered, "I do." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think it would end like this." "I didn't think it would begin like that," I said. The call ended with no resolution, just the sound of two people realizing they'd never be on the same side of this. A month later, the house was empty. The one I'd grown up in, the one my grandfather had lived in, the one my parents had treated like a guarantee. My grandmother walked through it one last time with me. She ran her fingers along the banister, paused in the doorway of the living room, glanced at the blank space where the display case had once stood. "Funny," she said softly. "They cleared out everything but the truth." We locked the door behind us. That evening, back at her place, she handed me another folder. "I updated the trust," she said. "It's all protected now. No one can touch it without your consent." I opened it, scanning the pages. My name appeared more than once. "I didn't ask for this," I said. She smiled gently. "Your grandfather didn't ask to be honored either. He earned it." I thought about the months I'd spent believing I needed to stay small to keep the peace. About how often I'd swallowed anger because it felt easier than conflict. I thought about the empty display case. And then I thought about the quiet weight of the medals now resting safely in my home. Some families survive by pretending. Mine survived by being exposed. And in that exposure, something unexpected happened. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. The first night I slept in my own place with my grandfather's keepsake displayed properly, I didn't turn on a single light. I let the room stay dim, lit only by the street lamp outside, and the faint glow of the city settling into itself. The medals rested inside a simple frame on the wall, no glass glare, no spotlight. The ceremonial dagger lay beneath them, secured quiet. And the letter, his letter, was folded back into its place, not hidden, just respected. For the first time since he died, I felt like I'd brought him home. I stood there longer than I meant to, boots-off uniform jacket draped over a chair. The silence wasn't empty. It was full in a way I hadn't known I needed. No raised voices. No guilt disguised as concern. No expectation that I make myself smaller so everyone else could feel bigger. Just stillness. My grandmother came by the next afternoon. She moved slowly, carefully, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She studied the wall, nodded once, and said he would approve. That was all. We sat at my small kitchen table with mugs of tea that went cold while we talked about nothing urgent. The weather, a neighbor's dog, a book she'd started and put down because it bored her. Then eventually she said, "Your parents are asking around." I didn't look up. "About what?" "About you," she replied. "About whether you're angry." I thought about it. "I'm not," I said honestly. "I'm done." She smiled at that, not the sharp smile from before, not the strategic one. A softer version. That's usually when people finally understand the damage they caused. "Do you think they will?" I asked. She considered it. "They'll understand the loss. Whether they understand why is another matter." I nodded. That felt right. My sister sent one last message a week later. It was short. No blame, no apology either. I didn't know it would end like this. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Neither did Grandpa. I typed. That's why he planned. She never answered. And strangely, I didn't feel the urge to chase the silence this time. Life moved on. I went back to duty, back to early mornings and long days, to orders given and followed, to the strange comfort of structure. But something inside me had shifted. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. I stopped softening my words to make others comfortable. And I stopped believing that loyalty meant surrender. When I thought about my parents now, it wasn't with anger. It was with distance, the kind that lets you see a pattern clearly once you're no longer trapped inside it. They hadn't stolen from me because they hated me. They'd stolen because they believed I would endure it. They were right about my strength. They were wrong about my silence. One evening, months later, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph I hadn't seen in years. My grandfather, much younger, in uniform, standing beside my grandmother, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Both of them looking straight at the camera, not smiling, not posing. Certain. I turned it over. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, were 4 words. You did not flinch. I framed the photo and placed it beside the keepsake. Not as a shrine. As a reminder. A reminder that honor doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. That family doesn't get to redefine your worth. And that sometimes the greatest act of revenge isn't destruction. It's preservation. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace, or watched someone mistake your strength for permission, I'd really like to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, or what part of this story stayed with you the most. We share stories like this every day, stories about boundaries, truth, and the moments that change us. So if you don't want to miss the next one, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. We're walking this road together,